The tiny Caribbean nation of Grenada was freed from British colonial rule in 1974. It was poor and produced socialist leaders who promised to share wealth that did not exist. Its beautiful beaches were popular with foreign tourists, but visits were difficult since the island lacked a major airport to accommodate large passenger aircraft. Tourists had to land at nations nearby and take small aircraft to Grenada the next day. Grenada sought foreign aid to build a large airport. Britain and 16 other nations offered some financing, but the communist government of Cuba offered to send hundreds of construction workers to perform most of the work. Cuba also provided Grenadian security forces with military weaponry. Grenada refused to take sides in Cold War disputes and maintained friendly relations with all nations. This put Grenada on the CIA's enemies list, and a plan was developed to expel the Cubans and install an American puppet government. When American President Ronald Reagan entered office, he set a goal of re-energizing the American empire that had lost momentum after its embarrassing rout from Vietnam. Invading Grenada would be an easy victory to display American imperial power. The CIA instigated violence in Grenada and blamed communists, while asserting the Soviets were building a military base on the island. A propaganda campaign began, and American military exercises were held to prepare for this invasion. The CIA stirred up friction among Grenada's leaders, resulting in the killing of Grenada's prime minister. This timing was perfect for the Reagan administration because it had sent American Marines on an ill-conceived mission to Beirut, Lebanon. A truck bombing had just killed 220 Marines, 18 sailors, and 3 soldiers. Grenada had a large medical school with a few hundred American students. President Reagan needed a distraction from this disaster, so gave the green light for an immediate invasion of Grenada, claiming American medical students might become hostages. He called to inform his political ally, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, since Grenada is a British Commonwealth. She objected because she knew from talking with the Governor General of the island that there was no danger to the students. But Reagan was looking for an excuse to display American military power, and Grenada was convenient, since it was nearby and mostly defenseless. The U.S. military wanted a few more days to collect intelligence and plan, but Reagan needed this done before the international press learned of preparations and flew to Grenada to report that no communist base was under construction and the American students were safe. The best overview of this imperial invasion was provided by former CIA officer John Stockwell. He had recently left the CIA in disgust after leading its disastrous intervention in Angola. See the short video linked below. Stockwell had traveled to Grenada on a business trip and warned its leaders that it might be invaded. He told the true story in a taped interview, linked below. Here are highlights.
The destabilization, we were already tracking that, and you recall our show here on Alternative Views last March, in which we predicted that Grenada would be invaded. And as a matter of fact, I was in Grenada in September talking to Maurice Bishop at some length, and I warned him that he would be invaded. The indicators were all there, and then we've got lots of details coming out now. Details like one of the medical students was a CIA case officer, complete with radio and frequencies to talk to the people out on the ships. Details like conversations that this infamous Major Austin had with U.S. officials before he and Bernard Cord moved to kill Bishop and create the crisis which Reagan used as an excuse to move in. I think there was a continuity of CIA effort against Grenada. That's documented. There was a plan and rehearsal for an invasion. They had an invasion ready. the Marine Islands exercises 18 months before, as in the Grenadine Islands. I mean, it was exactly what was eventually done.
To rescue
Americans, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. President Reagan's two statements on public television that Grenada was a threat to our national security. Well, now, come on, you know, this tiny little place out of all the 4 billion people in the world, why it would be named unless they were preparing the people of the United States for an invasion. President Reagan lied extensively on television about it. So did Schultz and the others. They invaded. I mean, the coincidence is absolutely overpowering. That was the week that the bodies were coming home from Beirut, the 241 Marines. That was the time of the crisis. That was when the United States was focusing on the bankruptcy of his policies, President Reagan's policies, in the Middle East, and we had these young Marines as evidence, and they were being brought back, and all of the television cameras in the world were going to be interviewing people about the horror of U.S. lives being lost in the Middle East. And suddenly, wham, a big dramatic invasion of Grenada, and people are talking about that a lot more than they are about the Marines. Instead of people being horrified, young Americans are flocking down to join the Marines because it looked like so much fun what was done in Grenada. And they were.
The invasion of Grenada was bungled as all the U.S. military services demanded an equal role. Army paratroopers wanted to jump into the fray, while the Navy and Air Force guessed at targets to bomb. So a hospital was bombed by mistake, killing 17 civilians. 9 American helicopters were lost, and all 4 members of a Navy SEAL team drowned while trying to sneak ashore. The confused Grenadian army and the Cubans didn't fire on American troops as they landed, only after the Americans began firing at them.
The Reagan administration said that there were Cuban brigades. There were not. There were engineers who were working on that airport for a project which Margaret Thatcher had helped finance. None of their rationales and explanations were true and honest. So you look for the reason why they were not overthrowing a Marxist dictatorship, because Bishop had been killed. Austin was in power, and he was a military man, the kind that they're so comfortable with normally. So the reason was to serve the timing of their own political problems and interests back here in this country. And it was a brilliant operation for that. It was so neat because Grenada is so small that they could smother it militarily. Even then you notice that they got in trouble because the Cuban engineers pulled out their AKs and fought back. And so you recall that the White House and the Pentagon were saying that there was half a Cuban brigade there. They were fighting so hard, and it turned out in the end there were exactly the number of Cubans that Fidel had said there were. There were 700.
They were all engineers.
And they were all engineers except for a few security guards. And just exactly as the Cubans had said.
There wasn't that general and the colonel and all that.
And the brigade and all of that. Nor did the Cubans attack the U.S. forces, by the way. And this is a very significant point. We landed, our helicopters and the parachutists landed. The Cubans could have killed hundreds of them in the air and shot down helicopters as they were coming in and parachutists as they're coming down. They didn't. They didn't fire a shot until the U.S. troops were on the ground, regrouped, and assaulted the Cubans. And then the Cubans fired back and put up one hell of a fight.
The Pentagon's propaganda machine ensured the public that the invasion was necessary and was a great success. The United Nations General Assembly condemned the senseless American invasion of Grenada as a, quote, flagrant violation of international law, by a vote of 108 to 9. The American invaders outnumbered the bewildered defenders 5-1, yet suffered 19 killed and 152 wounded, while 67 Grenadians were killed and hundreds wounded. There are several YouTube videos about this invasion that repeat the official propaganda about a communist threat and the need to save American medical students. An exception is the popular Timeline documentary series that produced an accurate account of this murderous political stunt as part of its series on the world's greatest military blunders. It is linked below and is surprisingly truthful for a mainstream documentary.
And it was, you know, it was another shabby chapter in U.S. history. It was another case in which a U.S. president is willing to waste the lives of young Americans for his own political ploys, to show his macho. And once again, I'm reminded of my own feelings, which developed when I was fairly young, of admiration and preference for the Greek leadership. When they declared war, they led the troops. And,